Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This session would focus on origin of Normandy and Norman settlement. I hope and expect that by the end of this session, you would understand what was the origin of Normandy in England and how did the process of Norman settlement take place. I hope you would also understand what was the impact of this Norman settlement on the people of England of those times. While talking about Normandy, what I would say is on the northern coast of France, directly across from England, a district extending some 75 miles back from the Channel, this was the place that we call Normandy. The name, as you can guess from the word Normandy, it was derived from the bands of northern men who settled there in the 9th and 10th centuries. The scene offered a convenient channel for penetration into the country, so this was the area from where, this was the route from where they came, and the settlements of Danes in this region furnished a close parallel to those of around the Humber. So taking this course, these people came here and got settled. A generation after Alfred reached an agreement with the Northmen in England, a somewhat similar understanding was reached between Rollo, who was the leader of Danes, and this leader of Danes was actually their leader in Normandy, and Charles, who was the king of France. So, all of these leaders had a kind of agreement amongst them. Particularly talking about the year 912, which has a great significance in the history of English language and the lives of people of England, because this was the year when the right of the Northermen to occupy this area of France was recognized. So it changed the history in terms of political power and the social settlement. In fact, for the next 1.5 centuries, a lot of the political upheaval happened. Masterful dukes raised the dukedom to a position of great influence. These dukes made themselves so strong that they could sometimes claim more power than the King of England. Normans readily adopted the French civilization, and later on in the times, you would see the impact of this acceptance of French civilization on the language of the people as well, because Middle English would show how French language was incorporated in their language. These were the people, the Normans, who injected fresh vigor into what they borrowed. It does not mean that they just borrowed from French language, they also gave it a new form and a shape, and thus added to its beauty. These were the people who not only were influenced by the French people in terms of language, but also their social and political life was influenced by them. So, if we talk about the French military forces, they were inspired by them, they were profited by them, they followed their patterns, and they made their systems according to that. Also, the Frankish law influenced them. They followed the laws that were made by the French people. They not only followed, but also improvised and improved them. These were the people who accepted Christianity and constructed a lot of Norman cathedrals that are seen, that are found even till date. It was the influence of this Norman conquest that the native people lost interest in their own language and they started learning French. So this was the time when French evolved, when French was accepted as a language of power, and the local languages were not given that much importance. The result was that the old Scandinavian language, the old Scandinavian tongue, disappeared gradually. I would not say rather gradually. The speed was more than what we would call gradual. Probably we can use the word rapidly for that. Second Duke sent his son to Baix to learn some speech of his forefathers. This is one of the instances that proves that over this period of few years, the native languages were lost on the way, and the rich people sometimes had to send their young ones to special education in their native languages. Moving towards the 11th century, I would say it was a time of the Norman conquest when the civilization of Normandy was completely French. So it was a shift that was almost complete by this time. Normans, in fact, were the most advanced people, most civilized people, technically most well-versed people of the times as well. In fact, before Norman conquest, there was a close contact between the French people and the people of England. And one of the examples of that I would give is Ethelred 1002 married a Norman wife, and when finally he had to take an exile, or he was forced to take an exile, he took exile and took refuge with the Duke of Normandy, who was the brother-in-law of the king. Later on, his son Edward was brought up in France, and he, in terms of lifestyle and language choices, was more a French than, I would say, an Englishman. In year 1042, Edward the Confessor was restored to the throne, and he was a person who supported Norman friends. The result was that a lot of Norman people were brought to England. They were helped in settlement. They were given higher positions. They were given political power. And the result was there was a strong French influence that prevailed the whole area. However, Edward's death had an impact. Edward died childless. He did not have a child. Of course, this resulted in an issue. The issue was of the choice of the successor, that who would be the successor of Edward. Godwin, who was one of the earls, he was the Earl of West Saxon, he emerged as a strong person during these times, and he claimed for this leadership. However, his election was challenged by William, who was the Duke of Normandy. So we can see that kind of conflict that was now happening between the people of England and Normandy, and which would have an impact later on at some other stages in the history of Middle English language. To cut it short, William had won the Battle of Hastings, but winning this battle does not mean that he had all the power. He had not yet attained the English crown because he was not the sole, I would say, ruler of England even at that time. East of England was burnt by him, and actually when it was burnt by him, this was for the first time that the people of London, the citizens of London, they decided to surrender. What was the result? The result was that he was crowned on the Christmas day on 1066 as their king. So, keeping all this history in mind, we can think of the Norman settlement. William's victory at Hastings was not only a political victory, it was a victory not only of a substitution of one ruler to the other. It was something more than that. Because Norman prelates were gradually introduced into the important positions of the church. This was happening to the extent that the two archbishops were Normans now, and English abbots were replaced by the Norman abbots. So all the important positions in Christian hierarchy in the religion, which of course was linked to the political hierarchy as well, these positions were gradually, the abbots and the monks and all the other people, they were replaced with the Norman people. So, as an example, I would say it was in 10,075 that 13 out of 21 of the abbots who signed the decrees of the Council of London, they were the people who were English. However, only in 3 years what happened? However, only in 12 years what happened? Only 3 of them were left. Foreign monks and priests also followed this example, so there was a complete shift. And this impact of Normandy and the Norman settlement had a great influence on the language of the people of the area, and Middle English was shaped by these people.